Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Welcome to another episode of Weird Web Radio. I'm your host, Lonnie Scott. In this episode, we're talking to Chiron Armand. Kai also just simply goes by Kai. And let me tell you, in post-production, there's usually some hiccups and burps and things to deal with, but this one was presented a whole new challenge I've never thought I'd have to deal with. And that was all the time we spent laughing together and trying to shorten that up so you don't have this overabundant experience of just constant laughter. Kai is one amazing human being out in the world doing good work. And honestly, I felt really honored to get a chance to talk to him, and I feel like I found a real kindred spirit out there. Kai's own bio says that Chiron Armand, founder of Impact Shamanism, is an interdisciplinary artist, a spirit-initiated shaman holding additional initiations in such New World traditions as Haitian Vodou, Brazilian Quimbanda, and the Unnamed Path. He's a trained Hoodoo root doctor in the Southern Conjure tradition and is the author of Deliverance, Hoodoo Spells of Uncrossing, Healing and Protection, and also the book Clearing Spaces, Inspirational Techniques to Heal Your Home. I highly, highly recommend the book Clearing Spaces. In fact, it's might be one of the most gifted books that I give to people. Anyway, I could go on and tell you why you should be here and why you should be listening to Kai, but I want you to just get in and listen to him go really in depth with each and every one of his answers and enjoy the show. Stay weird, my friends.
Kai, welcome to Weird Web Radio. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
That's great to hear from somebody who I deeply respect. So I'm really excited to get into this. Before we get too far into the round of questions, one thing I wanted to bring up right away was inside the cover to your book, Clearing Spaces, you have a dedication that says, "To Earth's wisdom holders and to the ancestors who have yet to come." That is an excellent dedication to a book, but I'm curious, why did you choose those words?
Okay, so I think anyone who moves in the sort of shamanic spiritual world or a spiritual, the spiritual community that might be reflecting certain aspects of indigenous teachings or cultures will often come across really beautiful statements like, for the next 7 generations and like to the earth and all that she has. And it's so beautiful. And we're like, yeah. And it's sort of like in us, triggers a sort of morality piece that makes us feel like a little bit better for the next 5 minutes. Or like, yeah, I'm gonna like maybe use only half a paper towel now when I, like for the rest of the day when I'm like wiping down my counter. And there is, I think, generally, there's this idea space where we have these things and these notions of ancestors yet to come, the descendants, and Earth's wisdom holders, etc. And then there's the embodied space. And what I experienced, I would say, over the past few years was this experience through my work, both with clients and in my own life, where I was really being called to transform some really deep, old, gnarly patterns in my life, was more of the embodied experience of what those statements mean. So that they weren't just platitudes for me anymore, but it was just like on a tear-jerking, truly personal, embodied level. Oh, I hope it's okay to curse, because I curse a lot.
Yeah, this is an explicit show.
Awesome. On an embodied level, it became this tear-jerking, personal, oh my fucking God, for the fucking descendants. Once you start doing certain kinds of transformative work on yourself, and you are including, because you're resolving perhaps past life energies of your own. You're resolving ancestral issues that you have, had for a while. And through that, you are getting a better perspective of the legacies that you have been left with, legacies left for you by biological ancestors, legacies left for you by ancestors of humanity, be those, Harriet Tubman or Adolf Hitler. You start to put yourself in context. You're no longer just this person who's wandering around the world. And, another platitude that we often receive that I think is total bullshit is, you're not here to be yourself. You're here to discover yourself. That is the most total bullshit platitude ever. Why? Because if I go to the Apple store and I buy an iPhone and I turn my iPhone on and my iPhone tells me I'm not here to be an iPhone. I'm here to discover what it could be. Bitch, I want my iTunes. I want my apps right now. You better start acting like an iPhone. And that's really the same for us. A lot has happened over the centuries and millennia to really distract us from the fact that we are technology. We are living in this technological feedback system. Matrix, really opened up our eyes, many people's eyes for that. But we ourselves are technology. And as technology, are meant to live in right relationship with our surroundings and with time, in right relationship with that which has come before us, and in right relationship with that which is coming after us. And once we start to put ourselves in context, a lot of meaning for these, 70 to 100 years that some of us have the privilege of being here starts to flood your life, and it becomes a lot less about sort of selfish desire and more about where does my selfish desire intersect with that which is needed for those who are coming, because we're living in a relay race. We're passing the baton always, and the baton that has been passed to us is kind of covered in feces, and we have the opportunity to pass a slightly less feces covered baton to those who are coming.
Now that is an answer. And there's a lot of information in there too. Wow. So you start off talking about these deep, gnarly patterns, right? That you've got to do something about. But what does that really look like to you? How do you even become aware of what specifically is going on you need to address?
So you take whatever you're complaining about, and I know we're all complaining all the time, and you start becoming an adult about it. And the way we start becoming an adult about it is, for me, that process became a process of slowly, with resistance, beginning to take some responsibility for what I was complaining about. When I say responsibility, I don't mean that everything I was complaining about was my fault. In fact, so many of the patterns that I was working through really weren't my fault. They weren't, well, we told you not to do that and you did it anyway. These were things that happened to me either very early in childhood, that became patterns that I was unconsciously living out in the world all the time. And that felt just like, well, this is just who I am. But I've always liked douchebags like that, and I've always dated douchebags like that, or I always, make these same unconscious, actions with money, and we just seem we seem, when sometimes it feels like we are not malleable. We are extremely malleable. We were made. These things were crafted in us. We've just gotten so used to them. So. Then we're complaining and we're saying, oh my God, why is my life this way all the time? And part of me becoming an adult or stepping into spiritual adulthood, I started having to change my complaints. I didn't stop complaining altogether. Absolutely not. What I did, though, was I stopped saying, oh, God hates me, or the universe hates me, or why does God always do this to me, or why are my helping spirits always punishing me in this way, or my ancestors are always kicking my ass. We hear a lot of these sort of notions in the spiritual world, and sure, ancestral helping spirits, depending on how we work with them, might sometimes do a little ass kicking. But I had to, everything I just said was very much the reflection of someone who believes that there is a paternal or parental control system out there that is judging me and putting things in my path as a way to deter me from joy. And that's simply not happening. It's not saying that there aren't entities in the world that do want that, but the universe isn't doing that. So I had to start growing up. And part of growing up was for me to say, okay, it's not the universe anymore. It's these helping spirits that I'm meeting. I'm meeting these helping spirits that other helping spirits are telling me to be connecting with. And it's their fault. It's your fault. You want me to be different because you don't love me and I'm not good enough. And I'm trying really hard. I'm working through these shadow patterns. I'm integrating these soul parts, but I'm not getting enough traction, and it's your fault. And then over time, it's like, okay, it's not your fault. It's and over that time, it became more and more about taking responsibility and recognizing that these patterns in my life, these gnarly patterns, weren't the universe's fault, weren't my helping spirit's fault. They were my parents' fault. And that's actually the truth. That's actually the truth. They were my parents' fault. They were my parents' fault, and they were their parents' fault. And they were the fault of the culture we live in and the legacy that we've been left with in our culture. And I could, weep in my bed about that. But I can also be honest and say some of those people who have left us the culture that we have, I was some of them in past lives. I don't remember making those decisions, and they're not decisions I necessarily would have made in this lifetime, but what's the statement that we often make? By God's grace, or by God's grace, I'm not that person, and it's really the truth, because people do horrible things because horrible things have happened to them. So that's what I mean by overcoming these gnarly patterns. Beginning to take, no matter, and some of them were bad, some of them were really debilitating. But the more I, no matter how debilitating they felt, took responsibility for them. And even when I wanted to really check out, and I mean capital C, capital O, check out, even then I realized still it wasn't even just my responsibility to take on and change these patterns, but it was my responsibility to stay here and figure out whatever was needed, because so much energy has gone into my being here. So much energy has gone into my being an incarnate person in this lifetime. To check out is such a slap in the face to all of the things that have gone into my being here.
I think that ties in really well with another thing you said, and you said it more than once. You said, these legacies that are left for us, whether they're from, grandma or even the darkest people in the history of humanity. So how do you see these legacies being passed down generation to generation until they end up in you to deal with?
So I would say that there's, it sort of happens on different levels. I would say that these, some of these soul loss that I experienced at an early age was soul loss that took place because my parents and those were their wounds. Their wounds made them incapable of allowing me to be big in the ways that my 3 or 4-year-old self knew that it was supposed to be big. And this is something that I see every single day in my practice. Actually, when I'm doing the work of soul retrieval with a client, what I'm doing is I'm literally speaking to this 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old version of themselves who knew why they came here and knew what they're doing, and they encountered an adult who simply was not going to allow them to be the person they came here to be. And they said, fuck, if I keep trying to be myself, this person is going to die. So I'm going to break off and just, allow this person to continue moving forward without me. But then we're moving forward and we think we're whole. We keep saying things about trauma, where we say, what do we say all the time? We say, oh, I'm over that. We're never over that. We're never over anything. We're never over that until we go back to the scene of the crime, take those parts back and integrate them. So that's one way. We have whatever caused great-granddad to have a conniption, then he had the conniption with granddad, who lost the soul part because of that, and now he can't fully, operate at full capacity, and he's treating, dad the same way, and then he's treating me the same way. And it's my, responsibility to end the cycle. Because even if I don't, because if I don't do so consciously, I am at the whim of the cycle, and I will hurt others unconsciously. I simply will. Hurt people, and I simply will. So that's one way in which the legacies pass through us. Another way that legacies pass through us is through ancestral patterns. I separate ancestral patterns from ancestral and generational curses, which are absolutely real. I see them, fairly often. Someone says, I hate, some witch is wagging their very bony, shriveled finger, often in the old world, whatever the old world was for us. Most of us are too busy lighting very specific figural candles to factor in the next 7 generations of the person that we're trying to harm. But that was a perspective that a lot of people have had in the old world. I don't just hate you. I hate you and everyone coming after you. So that's very generational curse and ancestral curse. May you be harmed and your descendants. But those are less common than the ancestral patterns that show up in which someone in our ancestry made some kind of choice, and that choice gets passed on down to the DNA. And that choice becomes the ramifications of that choice. In my experience, ancestral patterns are often experienced like a cloud. Like it's just the way things are. Family dynamics are very much like a soup. I was recently working with a client who was really coming to the realization that how much her life lacked joy. And she has a couple of kids, she has a husband, and we were talking about various magical and mundane things that she needed to do to start reclaiming her power and stepping into that joy that is obviously hers in this lifetime. But a huge piece of that was also, you need to spend at least an hour a day away from your family, where you can reaffirm and reassert your sovereignty and these changes, because families are like a soup. It's so easy, no matter how long you've been away at college or living in another state, you come back for Thanksgiving dinner and Aunt so-and-so is saying the same shit she's been saying for 30 years. So-and-so is drinking the same amount and you're, saying the same things because that collusion is still there. And ancestral patterns are a lot like a collusion. So that's another way that these legacies get passed on through us, whatever that ancestral pattern they might be. And I would say that in my experience, ancestral patterns can be quite diverse, whether they be an inability to recognize opportunities for joy. There was an ancestral pattern in my own life that was connected to a lack of sovereignty, because an ancestor of mine in my lineage actually walked away from her throne out of grief. And that affected not just myself. I actually came to understand it because it affected an older family member of mine who had passed on, but whom I couldn't cross over. And when I met him, he was sort of expressing grief about having not done what he came to do. And I was like, well, yeah, but you did so much great shit. You did such you did such wonderful things. And he was like, you don't get it. I was supposed to do really big things. And when I went to my helping spirits, they were like, yeah, he couldn't do those big things because you guys have this ancestral patterns where you walk away from your throne. So that's another way that the legacies get passed on through us, through ancestral patterns. And another way is the soup of collusion that we're all living in. We do the meditations, we do the rituals, we do the magic, but we all have to then step outside back into this world that we're all living in, this culture. And if you're living in the West, our culture has forsaken so many of the things that are its responsibility to us. The idea that the culture itself has a responsibility to its people sounds kind of foreign, but it's true. People say you're not owed anything. That's absolutely not true. If you're here to contribute, well then who's here to tell you what are the systems in place by which everyone comes together, the village comes together and says, thank God you're here. We're so excited. We've been doing this culture to the best of our ability, but in this relay race, you are obviously the next step. You're obviously the upgrade we've been waiting for. So here are your tools. We found out what they are. Here are your favorite foods. You'll be apprenticing with so-and-so in the next town. Thank God you're here. Let us know what you need so that you can do this work and move our culture forward. How can you contribute to a culture that is actively trying to kill you versus a culture that is actively trying to uplift you? So these are three ways, and there are more, that these lineages and legacies get passed on to us and underneath the surface, under the table. And we're sort of, we come here, I think, with all of this promise and intention and fire. I think that it's extremely risky for those of us who choose to incarnate in Western culture. I think we're taking a big risk. I think that we're kind of having a conversation with our helping spirits before we get here, where we're kind of saying, all right, guys, I'm going in. And like, but do you know how bad it is? Like, I know, but I'm going to try and bring this music thing, and I'm going to work with these helping spirits, and I'm going to incarnate into this ancestral line, and I'm going to pull it off. And like, you're going to forget everything you're talking about here. There's no one on the other side to help you remember. I know, but we're going to try and do our best anyway. And here we all are. We're trying to do our best, but there's so much stacked against us.
So how does an individual that becomes aware of these legacies and these deep patterns that are right there in your own lap? You're talking about all these cultural forces, but ultimately it takes the individual to make some sort of change. So how does that individual begin to change those patterns and legacies?
Well, first you start tracking information. And that is something that almost all of the people who come to me as clients are already doing in some way. They might not realize that they're doing it, but I always recognize it. And I find it really heartening because they're saying, I've been working through this thing. And when I look back, I'm realizing that it kind of feels like when I was 9 and this thing happened. Or even if they don't place an age around it, they're saying, you know what? It's so funny because all of the women in my family have been struggling with this as far back as I can remember. So we start by tracking information and being honest about things. We sort of pull the complaining back and we stop shaking our fist at the universe. Or if we do, we just shake our fist at the universe a little bit less, because we're beginning to track information and take some responsibility for what's going on. And then in my experience, once we start tracking that information, one of the best things for me is that we take it to spirit. We take it to our helping spirits, and we ask, well, what is at the root of this? Why is this a pattern? And in my experience, we're often surprised. We might experience a pattern that is not the root of it is not just soul loss, but it might be soul loss is a huge chunk of it, but the rest of it is really made sense of through this ancestral pattern. Because these things are under the surface, and we're living them in our conscious lives, spirit helps to fill in the places that we're not seeing, the places that we're not making sense of, where these connections are being made, the places where the root experiences and root circumstances that have made something so common in our lives, but so hard to grasp and therefore so hard to change. And we really do also, I think, here in the West, posit that, mind over matter, and if we just start thinking about things differently, everything will change. And I'm so grateful that there are things that we can change if we just think about them differently. But I think that for a lot of the things that we're used to experiencing as patterns, they do go much deeper than the mind. They are soul level things. They are ancestral things. And some of us might burn ourselves out and even get into a state of self-deprecation from our ability to change things from our mind. And it wasn't a mind thing at all. It was great-grandma made this decision that she really thought was best at the time, but it really didn't serve life, and now everyone's suffering.
That's a very curious way to put it. Great-grandma made that decision. It makes me take this moment where I reflect back on so many decisions I've made, right down to, spiritual alliances and jobs and physical friendships that I've had. And I've done some writing on this subject myself on how people can transform some of these relationships. And it's a topic that fascinates me because so much of these things are legacies that are passed down from us, ancestrally, like you say. And those techniques that come along to do something about it really help empower and change individual lives. And like I said, I think that ripples out and has an effect on the wider culture.
And it also, reflects that we ourselves have a responsibility. I don't want to contribute to what doesn't serve life. And I'm sure I will. I'm sure I already have in some ways. But when I die, I don't want to be, well, on one hand, just very simply, I don't want to be an unresolved ancestor. When I die, I want to be able to be someone who is healthy enough to simply cross right over. And not be someone that my descendants have to take the responsibility and move Kai on. And, he was a little bit stubborn and he's holding on to his old armchair that he misses so much and very used to, sit in his armchair and tell untrue stories about the war and demand this from everyone and generally be a, cantankerous. I don't want to be that person. I want to pass on. And everyone looks back and says, when I'm feeling sad, when I'm feeling lost, I can call on the spirit of Chiron Armand, and he comes and he brings comfort. Or he brings me wisdom, or he gives me a different perspective. And sometimes that was exactly what I needed to move forward. I have these debilitating ancestral patterns, but it's easier to, having cleared those ancestral patterns, it's easier to step fully into the resolution that is needed because of the legacy that Kai left. Kai left this, great grandpa so-and-so left this legacy that was so shitty. After he resolved that, Kai left this legacy that was just so great. His connection to the earth, to the elementals, to the descendants was great. So now I can tap into that energy. I can call on Kai at the ancestor altar, and he is helping me mend those relationships in my life that I've gotten so used to, so I can step into wholeness. That's the ancestor I want to be.
Sounds like a good way to be as an ancestor too. And speaking of ancestors, I've had this discussion with a lot of different people, both on and off the show. People experience ancestors in a lot of different ways. And I think ancestral veneration has become an important part of most traditions now. I'm glad to see that. do you experience ancestors as these individual beings, like you're talking about, great grandpa had this or that pattern that I'm going to resolve that's been handed down to me, or is it either or? Do you experience them as sort of this just force, this ancestral force? Because when we think of ancestors, you don't have to go back very many generations. We're talking about a lot of fucking people. And, how do you pick out individuals and things that you're working with? Or is it one of those where you're saying you're called to a specific person to work with and they step forward out of the crowd? I'm just curious, I guess, in this long rambling way of saying it, how do you perceive the ancestors?
So that's really good. That's a really good question. I would say I experience them both personally and as grouped forces, and in unique ways that never cease to surprise me. So I have ancestors that I work with and tend and call upon that were people I knew while I was alive. And I will say also a strong distinction that I make that was taught to me by a former teacher of mine, and that I share a great deal, is I don't speak to all of my ancestors. I don't honor all of my ancestors because many of my ancestors are still ghosts. We don't live in a culture that tends the gates of death, where we make sure that everyone gets ancestralized, we make sure that everyone moves on. So many of my ancestors have not actually crossed over. And so one thing I do is my invocation is always, I call upon my ancestral helping spirits who lived well and died well. The ones that bring all that is beautiful, true, and good from my ancestral line. I'm aiming for those ancestors who, after they died, they crossed over. And then they came back with less bias. They came back having made sense of their lives. I don't want the ancestors who they died and are still hanging on to that armchair all selfishly. If you didn't do the one thing you're supposed to do, cross over, how are you going to help me? And the other issue is that these ancestors who did cross over, they no longer have bodies. So they're working out their shit through me. So next thing I know, I'm having a penchant for a kind of alcohol that's not usually my kind of alcohol. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm just, drinking a little something different. Well, it was that ancestor's alcohol. It was that ancestor's bias. It was that ancestor's unresolved issue that's now becoming mine, because they don't have a body to work through their issue through with anymore. So in that first category, ancestors who lived well and died well, I also include the ancestors that I have moved on. I found out that they were unresolved, and I did the psychopomp work of moving them on and ancestralizing them, and now they're able to work with me in a good way. And then there are those ancestors who I never met, but are already resolved ancestors. They died, they moved on, and they might be ancient, but due to the circumstance of my life, the cooperation of my ancestors and other helping spirits, perhaps, they have now entered into my field, and it's like, all right, now is a good time. Now is a good time for us to start working together. Ancestors who are resolved, but that I've never met. One of the most beautiful things that I encounter in my work is when there is some shift on an ancestral healing, on a personal healing level for a client, and there's a rush of ancestral energy that comes forward where it's like, whoa, we brought the soul part back, and all of these male warrior dead are stepping forward in this powerful, forceful way to help you integrate this soul part and step into right relationship with the world and with your own power. And it's, kind of this innumerable ancestral force energy, but is very definite in its quality. This is a warrior energy that's coming forward. Similarly, I'll be working with someone and it'll be like, oh shit, all of this maternal ancestral energy. It's almost like a whole ocean of female ancestors who are nurturing and nourishing has just stepped forward. So I might be working with ancestral helping spirits who I might have an object for on my ancestor altar. Grandpa so-and-so has a knife. Grandpa so-and-so has a rose that I refresh every few weeks. But then I might have a small shield that I drew to represent that group of male ancestors that came forward, of warrior men that came forward at that time in my process. And I need to really work with them intensely for a few months to get that medicine. Or there's that cup of milk I've been refreshing every week for that group of maternal ancestors that came forward that I needed to really fall back on and fall into their arms for that period where I was resolving XYZ energy in my life. And then the surprising and fun piece, it's all fun, frankly, it's all fun for me. But a really interesting piece that's been showing up is when our ancestors are the land. Because we are the land. And that's another kind of platitude, like, we have to be good to the earth, we are the land. And like we think about it like, yeah, sometimes I like eat food and you are what you eat and food comes from the land, so I guess I'm the land. And it's like, it totally goes beyond that. Like, it's actually like a metaphysical promise. It's a beautiful, we are literally the land. Like, we think of the land, we think of topography and geography and dirt. But we are the land. We are these mobile, at this time in our history, highly mobile land. We really just are the land. We're just in flesh, and the land is flesh. It's like a metaphysical. It's like a koan. It's like this beautiful koan that really is there for any of us to parse out and make sense of. I've had moments where it was just so powerfully clear to me, tear-jerkingly clear to me, like how I am the land itself, just in a different form. And we have ancestors who are the land after they died. They crossed over, etc., but some part of them became the land via contract with the land, like so many indigenous peoples have. And because of that, the land is our ancestor. I'll never forget one of the first ancestral patterns I ever helped clear in a client's life. It was an ancestor who had married outside of the family's ethnicity and had children, but did not want to tell other family members. And because of that, their children and children's children began having a lot of health issues and mental health difficulties that they couldn't really place. And so that's what the client was aware of. The client was aware of, I'm having these mental health and physical health struggles, as are my sisters and cousins, and we don't know why. I had no idea it was an ancestral issue. I take this to my spirits. They say, this is an ancestral issue. This is what played out. It was actually a recent enough ancestral issue that the client knew. The client knew exactly who had done this. And my spirits called this ancestral pattern lack of integrity. We clear the ancestral pattern. Then I'm asking, okay, the pattern has been cleared from the ancestral line. What needs to be done for this person to clear it from their own life? And all of a sudden, with lightning speed, I just knew, well, a long time ago, this client's ancestors used to do so many rituals in the Caucasus Mountains that the Caucasus Mountains themselves are this client's ancestor. And the Caucasus Mountains were stepping forward to, as an ancestor, to help this client resolve this ancestral pattern of lack of integrity. And what has more integrity than a mountain? And over time, through that client working with the energy of mountain and that particular mountain range, their symptoms disappeared. So there's a sort of a few different ways in which I conceptualize the energy of ancestors. And I'm sure there are more that I've yet to discover.
Yeah. And yeah, you bring up really interesting points, especially concerning, we being the land. Because, in some respects, we're consuming local products and food, vegetation, animals. We breathe the local air, we eat or we drink local water. There are a lot of ways we truly, genuinely are products of the land that we live on. But I think the same way you describe, these specific mountains being an ancestor to someone can also be spun by someone as a way to say only those who are descended from this land have rightful spiritual access to this area or our ways. What would you say to someone like that trying to turn your own description into something of that nature?
Well, whether we are the land, there are places in this world that some part of my soul is the land because of past life energies as well. Some part of my soul is the land in places where I do not have direct ancestral heritage and lineage. Wherever we go, it seems, whether we are the land in that area or not, the land is generally pissed and wary. And that's often experienced as, the land perhaps will literally rebel against our being there. I remember camping once in an area of Pennsylvania, and this bee was just so hot. This one bee was so hostile to me over a period of days and was literally trying to chase me out of the area. And it wasn't until I did a little ceremony to honor the land there that the bee literally just stopped bothering me. So I would say that the story that we are not supposed to be connected to certain areas of land comes from, I think, a few different places. One, some areas of land are not for us, whether or not we are connected to them through past lives or ancestral energies. If that land was once open to humans, maybe it's not anymore. Maybe it's taking a sabbatical from human energy. Maybe it's choosing some chastity and it's like, nope, you guys fucked up too much. Leave me alone. Stay away. Talk to you in a few thousand years. If one of you is worthy enough, and that energy might also even be experienced as an indigenous person who is the land, giving us some side eye, like, nah. And we're taking it as, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm a Western person, but I'm one of the good people. And the indigenous person who is the land is like, I am here to guard. And the answer is no. I can see you more clearly than you can see yourself. And the answer is no. Maybe you're a healthy person, but maybe the people that you'll be bringing here won't be. Maybe the people that you'll be inviting here won't be. Maybe you don't have the discernment that is needed to fully understand what is needed here over the long run. It's not just about you and your good intentions, but it's about your own heart's eyes and your understanding of what is needed over a long period. And then there are areas of land that I think do have strong ties to currently living indigenous peoples. And, for instance, I have some connection to the Black Hills. But I'm not going to just go over there and just start doing ceremony. The Lakota peoples in the area, they are the guardians of that area on a spiritual level, and I'm going to be respectful of that and really honor that and take any requests I have to engage in ceremony to them first.
And that all makes perfect sense. I like that you break that down even to there are spiritual guardians of an area and to speak to them directly about what you would do in that area. Well, let's move on to a different topic for a little while. I want to give you a chance to talk about Impact Shamanism. How was this concept born?
So this concept, I think a lot of people are familiar with my work from an earlier practice that I was running called Conjure in the City, which is living on in some ways through Impact Shamanism. But what happened was that, and I love magic. I love magic. I love conjure. I love hoodoo. I love folk magic. I will continue to write about, perform, and do magic and spell work and conjure for clients. But one thing I began to encounter was that some of the things that people were struggling with were things that were of the level that we're talking about. Things such as soul loss or ancestral patterns. I had a client come to me once who had been sent to me by a colleague for a hands-on cleansing, but that client really wasn't aware of why they even needed it. They were so wounded. They were just so out of it. And I'm throwing cards and doing divination, and I'm like, well, what kinds of hands-on cleansing does this person need? And my spirits are saying she really doesn't need that. And my colleague's cosmology, I guess that would be, what was seen as needed. But what was needed was soul retrieval. What was needed was that it wasn't that this person needed to be cleaned up on the outside. It's that this person needed to have stuffing. This person needed to have their stuff back, their own power. And that was a really profound experience in my own practice. So Impact Shamanism came out of my desire to start to bridge the conversation between shamanic techniques that I think the folk magic world, the world of folk magic perhaps has lost. In contemporary folk magic, contemporary American folk magic has either lost or in certain arenas of where cosplay has taken over, denigrates. I think that there are some practitioners who might be less interested in healing than they are in playing a powerful historical role. So it was Impact Shamanism came out of my desire to start to bridge the conversation between shamanic healing techniques and folk magic techniques. But it also came out of this idea of what if the powerful among us, and I believe we're all powerful, but this is your decision, whether or not you see yourself as powerful, the powerful among us decided to become as powerful as possible. And not as powerful as possible as in, I have all the power. But literally those people who say, I think I'm a leader. I think I have things to offer, but I think that there might be pieces missing. What if I especially made myself available to those persons who know they have something to offer, but might feel like there's something getting in the way of what they have to offer. And that's also connected to Impact Shamanism for me. We have, I'm really interested in celebrities and what we do to celebrities. And I'm really interested in the energy of genius. So I'm going to probably enter into a contentious area here, because I know that people have a lot of really strong opinions, and I do too. But we look at someone like Kanye West, and whether you like hip hop or not, this person is a lyrical and artistic genius, I believe, and they have been expressing that on the world stage for many years. There's just certain things that this person has done with lyrics that are just amazing, and there's insight. Cultural insight that this person has had that has come through their work that to me is genius. This person is also deeply wounded. This person is also I would diagnose right off the bat, just from the work I do, this person is severely stunted around the age of 8. Something around the age of 8 years old happened to Kanye West, and some part of him is stuck right there at 8 years old. So now he has all of this money and power and influence, and he can't stop saying the stupidest fucking shit on Twitter and everywhere else, and influencing the masses who have latched onto his genius, but don't recognize that his genius is in no way backed by a sense of, or even the possibility of, spiritual adulthood and the responsibility that comes with that, because he is a stunted 8-year-old that our culture has failed miserably. And like so many people before him, we're doing what we've always done. We take the genius, we are in awe of it, and we put this person on the world stage, this person who is a wounded child, like so many of us, still working through our childhood wounds. And now we are dismantling and ridiculing him, not recognizing that in so many ways, we've created this. We've created this person. We've created this person by not giving them what was needed for them to be whole. And now that they're sort of failing us or showing their true colors, we're now just sort of dismantling them. We do this over and over again. We're a recognized genius in our culture, but do not give the person holding this genius what is needed for them to be equipped to carry it. And on top of that, when we're talking about issues like soul loss, especially soul loss, where we're talking about a piece of us that's missing, well, nature abhors a vacuum. So when we're talking about a piece of us that's missing, we're talking about a place in our lives where we are especially vulnerable to energetic attack and to unconscious forces and to possession and entity intrusion. And when we look at, there are certain photos of Kanye West that, this is not to get conspiracy theory. I mean, I can get conspiracy theory if you want me to. But when you look at certain photos of him, it's painful to me because, doing the work that I do day in and day out, it's very obvious to me. I look into his eyes and I'm like, this dude is possessed on certain levels, at certain places where he was never whole, or he hasn't been whole in 30 years. And when we're watching how certain ideologies and forces are moving into his life, and people are saying, you're acting very irresponsibly to certain communities, you're not being critical, Kanye, about certain issues, he can't. Because the forces of collusion and the unconscious forces that are driving those ideologies are able to make their way in exactly where he himself, his own soul, isn't present in his body. So that's also why Impact Shamanism came about, because I'm excited about the idea of the value of leadership and what responsible leadership looks like. And I'm excited about working with people who do have a sense of, I know that I'm going to leave a legacy. Maybe not a legacy as giant as Kanye West, but when I leave here, I'm going to have left some footprint. And I want that footprint to be as much of a blessing to the descendants as possible.
Now, let's imagine that someone wants to take up practices similar to yours. Maybe they're so interested in Impact Shamanism, they want to start getting involved. They want to break the ice with the world around them spiritually. What advice do you give them to actually start?
So you say as in sort of starting their own shamanic practice, or?
Yeah, because you were talking about, you love magic. You love folk magic and your shaman practices. There's a lot of different elements that incorporate into your practice, but it can seem a little pretty overwhelming, I bet, to someone who's really doesn't know what a lot of these words mean. They just feel this pull and this interest to begin. So what advice would you give to them?
I would say, there's so many places to start that one can start. And I notice a lot of resistance when the place to start is set up an ancestor altar. No one wants to set up an ancestor altar because that's not fun. Like, that sounds like, I don't want to go talk to granddad. Like, that's not cool. That's not a cool cauldron full of bones and blood. Like, that's not witchcraft. So I would say, sure, you're going to want to start an ancestor altar at some point. But, that there's the energy of needing to encounter mystery and beginning to interface with the energy of mystery, and simply know that there are forces in this world that, and I mean helpful forces, sometimes tricky forces, but there are forces in this world that if you call out to them, they'll call back. And I think that is an important place where a lot of people start in some way, whether that's I did a spell and then something unexpected happened, or it was nighttime and I was outside and I just, made a prayer and then something happened. I think that there's the importance of simply beginning to have a conscious conversation with the feedback system that we live in, and being in awe of that, allowing yourself to be in awe of that. And then I think there's the place of beginning to honor your inspiration and inclinations. So many people I meet, oh yeah, I've always wanted a tarot deck, but I just never got one. Or sometimes I think it'd be so cool to have this kind of a tool and maybe use it with this and just do it. The intersection between magic and shamanism and creativity is so strong, and the veil is so thin as to not be there between those. I recently told a client who I was encouraging to really step into the fact that in this lifetime she was really in the archetypal energy of witch, capital W witch, and that she needed to really live that. I think how I phrased it was, she needed to let her inner child sit in the lap of her high priestess and go. And that really, I think, is so important for us, whether it's the magician or the high priestess, card of the tarot that we identify with most in our magical practice, or even the Hierophant, letting the inner child sit in the lap of one of those figures in our lives, in our soul, magician, high priestess, or Hierophant, and then allowing that energy to go unbridled so that we go and get those items in nature or at a store that excite us visually, sensually, our physical manifestations of our own soul's yearning and creativity. I think that is so important, because what I think I've been talking about a lot throughout this show has been hard work and responsibility, and all those things exist, but you're not going to sustain the hard work that's needed if you're also not inspired, if there isn't some part of you that's also having fun, if there isn't some part of you that knows that you are interfacing with mystery and this is worthwhile. What do they say? Work hard, play hard. I think that's a huge component of my work, because transforming gnarly patterns can be difficult. It's hard work. But if you're also doing so with tools that speak to your heart and helping spirits that speak to your heart and giving yourself the nurturance that you need so that you can endure the path, then you're also playing hard too.
How does someone find their helping spirits? That's a phrase that you've used quite a lot over the past hour we've been talking.
Well, some of our helping spirits we already know because we've been in love with daffodil. It's our favorite flower since we were a kid. probably one of your helping spirits. And that's really the fun part. And and everyone, in this world where we're just constantly told to like dismiss ourselves. That's one of the most fun parts of my practice, where I'm like, yeah, this animal is one of your, like, I used to have a stuffed giraffe when I was a kid, my best friend. Yeah, giraffe is still with you and it brings this medicine. So looking back at our lives as, to connections that have always been there, that we've just never made the connection. One of the first things I ever did was a Scott Cunningham exercise in one of his books, where I threw some frankincense resin on a coal, closed my eyes, and had an inner conversation. And I met one of my helping spirits, a spirit guide, a humanoid spirit guide who never showed his face. And it was the first helping spirit of mine I ever met. And I was skeptical as hell. And I just knew I needed to move forward in some way. This was years ago, over a decade ago. And here I am, like, writing down what he's saying, and I'm thinking this is total bullshit. I'm insane, total skepticism. But over the years, I saw that everything that this energy had spoken to me was true. This is not to say I've never encountered a trickster energy, but it's to say that our ability to converse with our helping spirits and to find them with ease is much easier, much simpler than we realize. A huge part of my work in teaching trance and mediumship and divination is teaching that we are already aware of subtle energies. We just complicate matters so much because charm told us it's going to be bing, bang, boom. And it's actually much more of a whisper. It's much more of an inner knowing that we're already aware of. We're just so used to dismissing. So there's the technique I just spoke of that's helpful, but then there is working with a helpful path working, a guided visualization experience that someone might provide. Then there's deeper trance techniques such as shamanic journeying, in which one is using a sound vehicle to aid them in a deep state of trance to meet their helping spirits. These are all ways that are helpful. And then there is also there are excellent technologies that persons like myself use that are, I'm a medium, so I can help someone connect to their helping spirits. There are people who are espiritistas, who work with the technology of espiritismo in a misa or other form of technology to just tell you, and then provide you with some techniques that are going to be particularly helpful for you to connect with your helping spirits. Because once you connect with one, maybe that helping spirit doesn't want you to talk to them in journey all the time. Maybe they would prefer that you talk to them through cards. Maybe they would prefer that you talk to them in this locale with this tool. And that is where we're not just talking about meeting helping spirits, but we're talking about cultivating intimacy with them.
Excellent. Yeah. Beautiful way to answer the question. Thank you so much. I love the way you put all that. I like to ask my guests about, especially the more magical using folks, about how they would approach a haunting if someone came to them and said, I think my house is haunted. What do I do about it? And you're a little different. You sort of wrote a book exactly how to approach those issues. And if people are not aware, I highly encourage you go out and buy his book. It's Clearing Spaces, Inspirational Techniques to Heal Your Home. I don't think I want to ask you about houses particularly. I want a more unique perspective from you. The landscape is littered and populated with abandoned asylums, old hospitals, old abandoned prisons, places where there was likely a great deal of suffering and pain while people were living, that have now become these hollow but haunted places all over. And they are oftentimes the most popular targets for paranormal investigations. I've participated in them in myself. From your perspective, what should we be doing with these locations?
It's a really good question because I've often, questioning some of my own intentions in terms of what I think is needed. I like to be, I like to be a problem solver. And sometimes I think that I might have a notion of there being a problem where perhaps there is one, but maybe it's not my issue to deal with, or maybe it's not anyone's issue to deal with. I think that there are, just like you're talking about sort of areas of man-made trauma. I would sort of say that on a parallel level, there are areas not of man-made trauma, but like, or at least where there may be places where man-made trauma intersects with, say, the Earth's ley lines, or like stuff that was there before that made it that easy for this level of trauma to accumulate. And for a while now, I thought, in my desire to be a problem solver, I think I could get myself in trouble at some point trying to problem solve where I'm not supposed to at some point. So this has been like something that's been on my mind when it comes to these areas. Because, my idyllic hippie heart is like, let's go clean up the world. Let's go like move everyone on ever. And I think that there might be some locales where that's not what is called for and needed. And I'm going to have to stretch my perception of what is needed in certain areas. So I just put that out there on one hand. But I do think that, sure, there are some areas where, places like asylums, places of mass incarceration, where it's like, spirit says, hey, can you come clean this up? And I think that for me, there's just going to have to be an issue of discernment around those kinds of energies. And I would say that in my experience, one of the first things that would be the most helpful in those situations is getting the land spirits on your side. Why? Because the energy of the land isn't something that's just beneath our feet. It's something that actually goes above our heads. I was living as an anecdote I include in Clearing Spaces is of me living in a certain area of Brooklyn, and I was really struggling with intrusive energies in my space. And I was like, why are they finding me so easily? What's going on? And my spirits kept showing me dropping corn on the floor. And it made no sense until I finally got, oh, you want me to give an offering to the spirits of the land? Because they just kept showing me dropping corn. It was like, it felt very silly, especially when you're in a particularly frustrating circumstance and you can't make sense of what spirit is saying. It becomes all the more frustrating. You're like, speak to me plainly. So I walked around my block and I made offerings of corn and wine at just wherever I felt was needed. And I got back into my apartment, and in about 10 minutes, I became so nauseous because it was like energy of land activated. And it felt like it was pouring up through me, through the apartment. And it was from that experience I realized, oh, wait, this space would be less conducive to harmful energies and to ghosts or demons if the land was filling this space. You use the term hollow, and I think you might have meant in the HALLOW way, like there's something sort of sacred, about a place that is strongly haunted, but there is something also hollow, HOLLOW. There's something empty. The ability for all of these energies to accumulate here is partly due to the fact that what is supposed to be here isn't taking up its rightful space. And that has made this easier. So that's the first place I would start. The next thing I would start with would be, who are the helping spirits on my side? And this isn't work that I think that even necessarily I would do alone if we're talking about an asylum or, Alcatraz or something like that. I would want to be, working with a colleague or more. But I'd want to know who are the helping spirits it really serves me to be working with. And when I say helping spirits, I'm not necessarily talking about great granddad or even, giraffe. I'm talking about Archangel Raphael, Archangel Michael. I'm talking about Saint Cyprian. I'm talking about some of these heavy hitters when it comes to the energies of exorcism and psychopomp work and moving on of dead and protection, so that I can really maximize my impact in one fell swoop. Do they need me to do work with them before I even get to the location, to just sort of start a novena of prayers to start moving that work, that energy on? Do they need me to, walk around this location like Jericho, perhaps with an incense of theirs? Because, kind of like, I want walking in to be the last, to be like the last component. Walking in, if I'm clearing it, I want to do as much work at home first, as much work in journey first, maybe walk around 7 times, certain prayers. I want walking in to be and now we're putting on the final polish. So those are certain ideas that I would use. And in that, I would also, pay strong attention to what those helping spirits would suggest about beginning, middle, and end steps and what to expect. Perhaps not everything can be resolved in one fell swoop. Perhaps a huge chunk of it can, but there are some energies that are going to get settled and move around first, before, maybe for a year before like the next component needs to happen. I know that one of my favorite things when it comes to exorcism work is Conjureman Ali. In his pamphlet on St. Cyprian, he includes an excellent incense and ritual for exorcism with St. Cyprian that I have used to great effect, given to clients who have used it to great effect. And then after that work, I want to do divination on what is the protection that is needed, what is the quality of protection already inherent in the space, and then what is the protection that is needed, because you don't want to do heavy work like that and then have to redo it.
Excellent advice. Yeah, those locations provide a lot of challenges, and much like you,
I can only imagine.
Yeah, much like you, the more work you can do at home, the better it is when you actually set foot on the ground.
Totally.
Well, man, it's been really awesome talking to you today. I could take up several more hours of your time, and I hope one day you'll let me. But for all intents,
gladly.
For all intents and purposes today, we've come towards the end of the show, and this is the part where I kind of like to ask, if I haven't covered something that you'd like to bring up, what would it be?
I am teaching some online classes that I'm really excited about throughout the summer, fall, and winter. If you haven't checked out my website, please do so. Consider joining my mailing list. There are different offerings I'm putting out that I'm just really excited about sharing with the world. Things that are, especially things that are at the intersection for me of both the spirit world and art. So much of Impact Shamanism and what I speak about in the website's About page speaks to that intersection of leadership, art, and the spirit world. And I would say that I am finally myself beginning to take on the artistic piece in a way that I always knew that I always knew that I was supposed to and that I could, but it's finally happening. So please come share in some of the creative work that I am doing, not just by myself, but with other amazing individuals that I make, that are in my life, persons that you've interviewed, like Paige Zafiriou. Caitlin Foisey is an incredible artist that I've been collaborating with recently. There are great things that are happening in the world, and stay connected.
Awesome. Now tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me at impactshamanism.com.
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you again for being here. And for everybody out there who's listening, thank you for being here as well. If you'd like to hear the next round of questions I'm going to go over with Kai, you're going to have to be a Patreon supporter, and you all know how to do that. You can just go to weirdwebradio.com, click on join the membership, or go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio. In the meantime, everyone out there, stay weird, my friends.
Okay, gang, that's a wrap on this episode of Weird Web Radio. Once again, thank you all for listening. Now, it's time for you to go join the official Weird Web Radio membership. Go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and you can choose your rewards and become a member today. Enjoy all the exclusive benefits, inside information, and plenty of bonus audio with each guest. Now, you can find the show at weirdwebradio.com and weirdwebradio.libsyn.com. The show is listed on Facebook and Twitter as Weird Web Radio, and you can find me on Instagram as just Lonnie_Scott. Please remember to rate and comment and share the shows that you like, and it helps others find us in all the search results. Shoot me an email if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you know someone that would be a great guest in upcoming episodes. You can send that to weirdwebradio@gmail.com. Seek the mysteries and delights in life, my friends. As always, stay weird out there.